There's a tropical wave in the Atlantic right now, and every major forecast model on the planet is telling us the same thing. This thing is going to develop. The question is not if, the question is when, how strong, and where it goes when it does. That INSAR matters a lot for people across the northeastern Caribbean, Martinique, Dominica, up through the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, because the models have been pointing this system in your direction. At the same time, there is a completely separate threat building in the Pacific, and that one is even more urgent. Hawaii, pay close attention. Forecasters are giving the system heading your way a 90% chance of becoming a tropical cyclone within the next 7 days, and the models have been pointing it directly at the Big Island. We're covering all of it: the Atlantic system, the Pacific system, the Saharan dust blanketing the Caribbean right now and what it's doing to air quality and to storm development, and the full rain breakdown, island by island, for this week. Let's get into it. Start with why the Atlantic has been quiet. Since Tropical Storm Bertha fell apart in mid-July, there hasn't been a single named storm in the basin, not one. For a region sitting in the heart of peak hurricane season, that's unusual, and it comes down to two things working together. First, wind shear. Strong vertical wind shear has set up across the Caribbean and Western Atlantic. Shear takes the thunderstorm clusters, trying to organize around a developing circulation, and rips them apart before the storm can escape. Lish of vertical structure. A tropical wave can have warm water underneath it, plenty of moisture, everything it theoretically needs, and still fail to organize because the upper level winds are too hostile. Second, the Saharan air layer. This is worth explaining properly because it's affecting people in the Caribbean right now in a very direct way, not just in terms of storms, but in terms of daily life. The Saharan air layer is a mass of dry, dusty air alley, wafted off the Sahara Desert and carried westward across the Atlantic by the trade winds. It happens every year, typically peaking from late June into mid-August, and right now it's very active. You can see it on satellite as a brownish haze spreading from Africa across the Atlantic into the Caribbean. Jamaica, the Cayman Islands, the Bay Islands of Honduras, and much of the northeastern Caribbean are sitting under this dust layer right now. If the sky looks hazy and pale instead of blue, that's why. If the air feels thick, that's why. If you have asthma, allergies, or any respiratory condition, this is a week to be careful. Stay indoors when you can, keep windows closed, avoid outdoor exercise during the hottest parts of the day when dust concentrations peak. This isn't just an inconvenience. For people with breathing issues, it's a real health concern. Here's the interesting part in relation to storms. The dry air in the Saharan layer acts as an inhibitor the same way shear does. Tropical systems need deep atmospheric moisture to fuel thunderstorm activity, and dry air starves them. But the dust isn't covering the whole basin evenly. Meteorologists are describing the setup as something like a battle zone, dry, stable Saharan air dominating the northern half of the main development region, while a moister, more active intertropical convergence zone pushes along the southern half. The tropical waves moving through right now are threading the southern corridor, where there's more moisture and warmer water, and that's exactly where the system we're watching is operating. It isn't fighting through the worst of the dust, it's slipping south of it. Now to the specific system. As of Tuesday, August 11th, the National Hurricane Center is monitoring a tropical wave still well east of the Caribbean, roughly 500 miles southwest of the Cabo Verde Islands, off the African coast. Right now, it's a disorganized cluster of thunderstorms and low pressure. But the key word is right now because conditions ahead of it are becoming increasingly favorable. The NHC's August 11th forecast discussion stated directly that environmental conditions are expected to become more conducive for development over the next couple of days, and that a tropical depression will likely form during the latter HUALOF of this week as the system moves west to west-northwest across the central tropical Atlantic. That's the official read, a likely tropical depression forming later this week. If it strengthens further into a tropical storm, the next name on the 2026 Atlantic list would be used. AccuWeather's lead hurricane expert has pegged Wednesday through Friday of this week as the most likely development window. That's close. Not next month, not even next week in any distant sense. By 4 days out, most models have this system organized to at least tropical depression status, possibly a low-end tropical storm. So development itself looks fairly likely. Where it's harder is the track. And this is where I want you to understand the real uncertainty rather than a simplified version of it. The models split into two camps. Camp 1 includes the AI-based machine learning models. They tend to keep the system weaker, a tropical depression or low-end tropical storm, but track it farther south, bringing it close to or even through the Leeward Islands by this coming weekend. That's the area for Martinique and Dominica northward through Guadeloupe, Antigua, the Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico. If this plays out, the primary concern wouldn't be catastrophic wind from a major hurricane. It would be heavy rainfall, and locally heavy rain from even a weak system can cause serious flooding. especially if it moves slowly or stalls over an island. Camp 2 is the more conventional physics-based models, the GFS and the European ECMWF. They show a slightly stronger system that gets lifted north by a frontal boundary near Bermuda, curving it away from the islands and out into the open central Atlantic. In that scenario, the islands get spared direct impact, but the storm keeps strengthening over open water. I can't tell you with certainty which scenario is right, and anyone who claims they can isn't being straight with you. What I can tell you is that the trend over the last 24 hours has been toward the system sitting a notch closer to the Caribbean than it was a day ago. That trend is worth watching. If it continues over the next 24 to 48 hours, the northeastern Caribbean needs to move into a heightened state of awareness. We're not in action mode for any specific location yet. We are absolutely in serious monitoring mode. The Bermuda front is the key variable. If it's stronger and arrives on schedule, it acts like a wall, stopping the system from pushing west and curving it north instead. If it's weaker or slower, whatever the system has become by the weekend gets to push farther west and closer to the islands before it eventually gets captured and pulled north. The difference between those two outcomes is the difference between a band of heavy rain and gusty wind for the northeastern Caribbean versus a direct tropical depression or tropical storm encounter. Over the next 24 hours, watch two things: the track of the system and the timing and strength of that Bermuda front. A lot of people ask about this, so let me explain it once clearly. The Bermuda High is a large, semi-permanent area of high pressure sitting over the western Atlantic. It's not a storm, it's not dramatic, but it controls the direction tropical waves and developing storms travel across the basin. Think of it as a giant dome of sinking air. Systems moving west off Africa get steered around its southern and western edge. When the Bermuda High is positioned far north and strong, it pushes storms deeper into the Caribbean and toward the Gulf of Mexico. When it weakens or shifts, storms curve north earlier and stay out over open water. The position and strength of the high over the coming days will directly influence whether this system tracks close to the northeastern Caribbean or curves away safely. The frontal boundary near Bermuda is essentially in a tug-of-war back and forth that makes 5-day tropical forecasts. Right from the system above, there's an earlier tropical wave that moves through the southeastern Caribbean over the next day or two, emergencies on its own. But for areas sitting in drought, so you know what to expect where you are. Trinidad and Tobago, rain chances climbing to as high. Grenada, 60 to 70% chance tomorrow. Vincent and the Grenadines, similar story. Barbados, 50% chance of showers tomorrow. St. Lucia, around 60%. Martinique and Dominica, about 40%. Guadeloupe, around 30%. Antigua and Barbuda, gusty winds and Ice Kitts and Nevis and Montserrat, similar. Anguilla, St. Bart's, St. Martin, about 40%. Puerto Rico. Around U.S. and British Virgin Islands, can't rule out a shower or two. The Bahamas, northern Bahamas, and Caicos, 20 to 40%. Haiti and the Dominican Republic, both around 12%, a chance of an isolated afternoon storm. Jamaica, around 40% tomorrow, otherwise very Cayman Islands, around 30%. The ABC Islands, Aruba, Curacao, Bonaire, Costa Rica, and Panama, both around 50% for the next couple of days. Nicaragua, up to 50% Thursday. Honduras, 40 to 50%. Guatemala and El Salvador, around 60%. Yucatan Peninsula, watching flooding producing rain. There's a tropical disturbance called Invest 93C. Tropical storm over the central Pacific system could reach around 70 km. This also fits the broader pattern forecasters have been expecting for the much more favorable conditions for a tropical cyclone formation. Supplies, water, food, medication, projectile. Start thinking about how to secure it. South swells are already building ahead of the system, with advisory track and intensity aren't locked in yet. But the tropical weather, the past 3 to 4 weeks have killed hundreds and left thousands more missing. One more piece worth understanding, sea surface temperatures right now. Warm water is the energy source. When a developing system moves over, 2026 Atlantic season has been quiet so far, your actual daily life. Monitoring mode means stay informed, keep checking updates, no emergency actions needed yet. Action mode means the threat is specific enough and close enough that it's time to get supplies together, check your evacuation route, secure your property, and communicate a plan with family. For the Caribbean, watching the potential system described above, we are in serious monitoring mode right now. For Hawaii, watching the Pacific system, you're already much closer to action mode, given how quickly this one is developing. Watch two things this week. First, whether the Atlantic system tracks toward the northeastern Caribbean this weekend. The next 24 to 48 hours of model runs will be very telling. And the moment the picture clarifies in a meaningful direction, that's worth a dedicated update. Second, the Pacific system as it strengthens and approaches Hawaii. That one is more locked in. It's very likely to develop and very likely to move toward the islands. The open question there is exact track, exact intensity, and which part of the chain takes the worst of it. Sunday through Monday is the window to watch for the most significant impacts. The good news on the Atlantic side, even in the worst tracking scenario for the Caribbean, this is not expected to be a monster hurricane. The concern is flooding rain, gusty winds, elevated seas, and localized flooding risk for islands in its path. The uncertainty is real, and it will resolve over the next couple of days. Stay informed, stay prepared, and if you're in either basin's path, make sure the people around you know what's happening. Hurricane season is in full swing, and the next several days are going to tell us a lot about what this peak season looks like. I want to spend a minute on something a lot of viewers ask about because it comes up every time there's a split like this one. Why can't the models just agree? The honest answer is that 5 days out, a tropical system that hasn't even formed yet is one of the hardest things in meteorology to pin down, and it's not because forecasters are guessing. It's because the atmosphere itself hasn't decided yet. A wave like the one we're watching in the Atlantic doesn't have a defined center of circulation right now. It's a broad area of disturbed weather. Small differences in exactly where thunderstorm activity consolidates, exactly how strong the resulting circulation becomes, and exactly how deep that circulation extends. The AI models, trained heavily on historical patterns, are picking up on similarities to past systems that tracked farther south and stayed weaker. The physics-based models, which simulate the atmosphere from first principles, are placing more weight on that frontal boundary showing up on schedule and doing its job. Neither approach is wrong. They're just emphasizing different pieces of a genuinely uncertain puzzle. This is exactly why forecasters talk in terms of scenarios and probabilities instead of a single confident line on a map. And it's why the responsible thing to do right now is exactly what we're doing. But watching the trend, not overreacting to any single run. For those of you in the Leeward Islands, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands, here's what serious monitoring mode should look like in practice without jumping ahead to panic. Start paying closer attention to your local meteorological service and to NHC updates, which come out multiple times a day during an active watch period. Know where your important documents are. Make sure your phone and any backup power banks are charged. If you live in a flood-prone area, near a river, at the base of a high L, or in a place that's flooded during past heavy rain events, this is a good week to clear drainage around your property and make sure gutters aren't clogged. None of this requires panic. It requires the kind of basic readiness that costs you almost nothing if the storm curves away, and saves you real trouble if it doesn't. The reason I keep separating monitoring mode from action mode is that crying wolf on every tropical wave erodes trust, and when a real close-range threat eventually shows up, people stop listening. This system, as of right now, is not a confirmed threat to any specific island. It's a system worth watching closely because the ingredients for it to matter are there. That's a different thing, and I want you to hold both of those truths at once instead of collapsing into either nothing to worry about or emergency. For Hawaii, it's worth understanding why this year's setup looks the way it does compared to a typical season. In a neutral or La Niña year, systems approaching the Central Pacific often weaken quickly because of stronger wind shear and cooler water closer to the islands. This year, with El Niño in place, that protective weakening doesn't kick in as reliably. Sea surface temperatures closer to the islands are running warmer than they would in a typical year, and shear across the approach corridor has been comparatively weak. That's the difference between a system that fizzles out a few hundred miles offshore and one that maintains strength or even builds as it closes in. This doesn't mean a direct damaging hit is guaranteed. Storms approaching Hawaii still frequently weaken in the final 24 to 48 hours as they interact with the island's terrain and with drier air that can wrap in from the north. But the setup this year removes one of the layers of protection that residents have been able to count on in past seasons, which is exactly why the messaging out of the Central Pacific Hurricane Center has been more urgent than usual for a system that hasn't even formed yet. If you've been through a close call before, Hurricane Lane in 2018, Hurricane Douglas in 2020, Hurricane Hone in 2024, you already know the routine. If you're newer to the islands or haven't lived through one of these, treat this as your cue to actually build the kit and the plan now rather than waiting for a watch or warning to be issued, because supplies disappear from shelves fast once an official alert goes out, and driving to multiple stores during an approaching storm is not where you want to be spending your limited preparation time. To make this concrete, here's exactly what I'll be tracking before the next update. In the Atlantic, whether the system consolidates into a defined tropical depression on the timeline the NHC laid out, whether the model consensus continues drifting south and west toward the islands, or stabilizes and starts trending back north, and how the Bermuda frontal boundary is behaving on the latest runs, whether it's arriving on schedule and with the strength needed to do its job. In the Pacific, the official formation of the system into a tropical depression or named storm, any changes to the forecast track relative to the Big Island, and any adjustments to the projected wind speeds as it approaches the island chain. The moment any of these change in a way that matters, that's when this moves from monitoring to something more specific, and that's when I'll have another update out for you. I know a lot of information has been packed into this one, so let me leave you with the short version. In the Atlantic, a system is very likely to develop into at least a tropical depression later this week, and there's real uncertainty about whether it tracks close enough to the northeastern Caribbean to matter or curves safely away into the open ocean. We'll know more within 24 to 48 hours. In the Pacific, a system near Hawaii carries a 90% chance of development within 7 days. Models have it tracking toward the Big Island, and the highest impact window looks like Sunday through Monday. That one deserves your attention now, not later. Stay informed, stay prepared, and share this with the people around you who need to hear it. I'll be watching every update that comes in, and I'll be back the moment either picture changes in a way that matters. Be safe out there. Terms have come up throughout this, and it's worth being precise